Good morning and welcome to our 6th Quilts of Valor ceremony here at SRCreek. May we take a moment, please, to remember those SRCreek veterans that we lost this past year. Renee Ofort, Dean Bailey, Eli Burnswig, Randy Cotton, Don Devlin, Murray Levitt, Stan Miller, Bill Schneider, Don Vecca. Thank you. As we just heard, our Declaration of Independence ends with the phrase, "We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." From the very beginning, we've been dependent on one another for our well-being. The various things that bind us together, sharing risk, mutually held beliefs, common needs, love, create a link between us, and we share mutual responsibility for each other's welfare. It's called interdependence. Interdependence as an underlying principle of democracy has been invoked many times in our history of our country by Adam Smith, famed Scottish political economist in Wealth of Nations, published in 1776 at the dawn of modern economic thinking, and by David Ricardo, noted 19th century British political economist who extended the idea to nations. The concept of interdependence of nations became a pillar of post-World War II international order, and it has coincided with extraordinary periods of peace and prosperity in our industrialized world. Woodrow Wilson alluded to interdependence during the suffrage movement. In his address to the Senate in September of 1918, he made an impassioned plea for the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which would grant women the right to vote. Citing the invaluable service of women during World War II, he said, "Democracy means that women shall play their part in affairs alongside men and upon an equal footing with them. Are we alone to refuse to learn the lesson? Are we alone to ask and take the utmost that our women can give and still say we do not see what title that gives them to stand by our sides in the guidance of the affairs of their nation and ours?" Interdependence was cited by Franklin Delano Roosevelt during his nomination speech in 1933 during the Great Depression. He said, "That is why we are going to make the voters understand this year that the nation is not merely a nation of independence, but it is, if we are to survive, bound to be a nation of interdependence, town and city, north and south, east and west. That's our goal, and that goal will be understood by the people of this country no matter where they live." And this isn't just a message for the nations of the world. It applies to all kinds of communities, all types of communities, large and small. Who better to understand and embrace the concept of interdependence than those of us who make up this community here at SRCreek? Just as our country embarked on a great experiment called democracy, our community has been learning how to live together too. So while we celebrate our nation's independence today, on this, the 243rd anniversary, maybe we should also take a minute to remember, to appreciate the joy and the strength that comes from our union with others and our contributions to our communities and our sharing of our experiences with one another. A good example of depending on one another is the often invisible other half of the team, the women who kept the home fires burning while the men in their lives served. Would the spouses of our veterans please stand? Come on, ladies. Thank you for your service too. We have with us today some of our community staff members who gave up part of their day off with their families to help us honor our veterans today. Steve Manning, our Director of Environmental Services, served in the United States Navy for 8 years on the USS Spadefish fast attack submarine out of Norfolk and the USS Honolulu fast attack submarine out of Pearl Harbor. Steve Manning. Steve, your community thanks you for your service. David Sann, our Director of Plant Operations, served in the United States Navy as a nuclear machinist from 2003 to 2009 on the USS Michigan, a guided missile submarine out of Bangor Naval Submarine Base in Washington. David, will you please raise your hand? David Sann, everyone. David, your community thanks you for your service. Our Director of Food and Bev, our brand new Director of Food and Bev, who's having a few busy days here, Zach Ziegler, served in the United States Army Artillery in Germany from 1989 to 1992. Zach Ziegler. Zach, your community thanks you for your service. Our Executive Director, Zeke Griffin, and our Associate Executive Director, Patrick McElroy, join us as presenters today. Thank you, gentlemen. We also have with us reporter Carol Graham and photographer Doug Jorgensen from The Independent. Welcome, Carol and Doug. Our quilters will now present the Quilts of Valor. Veterans, when you hear your name, will you please come forward? Ray Austin, United States Army, 1953 to 1958. Ray's quilt was quilted by Diane Green and Gretchen Crozier and will be presented by Julie Casamajor, Jan Pinney, and Bonnie Schwegel.
Ray Austin began playing trumpet and trombone as a child. He played with many bands in many situations, including Truman's second inaugural, the acclaimed Moravian Trombone Choir, and at the Orange Bowl with the Syracuse Band, before he enlisted in the U.S. Army Reserves in 1953. So Ray was surprised to be drafted in 1954, completed basic training, and was assigned to the 56th Army Japan Band at Camp Zama, 25 miles southwest of Tokyo, which had been the Japanese Army Academy, similar to West Point. In Japan, the 56 Army Band's 40 members performed frequently as a goodwill gesture. One memorable performance helped celebrate the emperor's birthday in Tokyo's spacious and elegant Ueno Park. Ray was discharged in August 1958. When he returned stateside, he moved to California, which had enticed him on his way to Japan. As a civilian, Ray taught music, directed school bands, and performed in several local bands. Ray and Juanita moved to Stone Ridge Creek in 2014.
Al Baer, United States Air Force, 1961 to 1967. Al, your quilt was quilted by Gretchen Crozier and will be presented by Julie Casamajor, Sally Twisselman, and Jerry Powell.
Al and his family watched planes fly in and out of the Salt Lake Airport when he was a child, and he became determined to join the Air Force. He was a member of the Air Force ROTC and got his pilot's license before graduating from the University of Utah. In 1961, Al entered pilot training at Williams Air Force Base in Arizona. He was assigned to the 39th ATS Military Airlift Command at Dover Air Force Base, Delaware, where he flew Douglas C-133 Cargo Masters, then the biggest planes in existence. At first, he flew mostly to Europe. Later, he made trips to Vietnam, where the huge plane's lack of a defense system and airstrip blocking size required quick turnarounds. The plane was often unloaded and reloaded in less than an hour. In 1966, the 39th ATS received the Outstanding Air Unit Award. Al left the airport in 1967 and became a pilot for Pan American Airways. Al and Patty were part of the Yellow Shirt crew, who urged the Pleasanton City Council to move SRC along. They moved in October 2013.
Craig Bell, United States Air Force, 1967 to 1972. Your quilt was quilted by Gretchen Crozier, and you will be presented by Marilyn Holton, Barbara Schneider, and Patrick McElroy. With Barbara's presence here today, we remember Bill. Hold it close to your mouth.
Craig is a fifth-generation Californian born in Los Angeles. He graduated from San Jose State University in 1967 with a bachelor's degree in business and industrial management. Shortly after graduation, Craig found the Air Force. He completed basic training at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas, and immediately thereafter was sent to electronics school at Keesler Air Base in Biloxi, Mississippi.
Armpit of the South.
For those of you in the back who didn't hear that, he said armpit of the South.
Was that in the script, Barbara?
No, not at all. His entire service time was spent in California. He was a communications officer at McClellan Air Force Base in Sacramento and at Norton Air Base in San Bernardino. He was an Air Force captain. Thank you for your service, Craig.
Bob Blaschka, United States Navy, 1957 to 1961, quilted by Gretchen Crozier and presented by Marilyn Holton, Jan Pinney, and Susan Del Baccio.
Bob Blaschka. This won't be long. He served in the United States Navy from 1957 to 1961. He was a Supply Corps officer on a destroyer and had 2 years of sea duty during the Lebanon crisis of 1958 and was on Mediterranean Sea Patrol. We thank him for his service.
Yeah, thank you.
Bill Dark, United States Army, 1954 to 1956. Quilted by Gretchen Crozier and presented by Di Lovett, Dottie Necker, and Zach Zeigler. Thank you.
Bill Dark, Jr., U.S. Army Specialist, 3rd Class, Army Security Agency in Kenai, Alaska in 1954 to 1956 before it became a state. He attended Alhambra High School. He went to John Muir Community College before he transferred to Whittier College when he was drafted into the U.S. Army at Fort Hood, and he went to Fort Hood. He was assigned to Morse Code School in Massachusetts and then to Advanced Tech Type Interception Training School. He returned to Whittier when he graduated with BS degree in economics. Anita, his now wife, received her master's and they married in 1959 and enjoyed a life of traveling until they moved here in 2017. Thank you for your service, Mr. Dark.
Tom Horton, United States Army, 1964 to 1969. Quilted by Donna Faye Bauer, Virginia Butterfield, and Vicki Moore, and presented by Marilyn Mulker, Rita Ofort, Donna Faye Bauer, and Ricky Moore. With Rita's presence here today, we remember Renee.
After graduating from the University of Georgia, Tom enlisted in the U.S. Army. He was selected to join the U.S. Army Security Agency, part of the Army's intelligence branch. To serve in this agency, a top secret clearance was required. Tom was among the earliest U.S. military personnel in Vietnam. He was involved with top secret crypto communications efforts in Saigon and Phu Bai. After almost a year in Vietnam, Tom had become a second lieutenant and was assigned to finance school in Indiana. Here he was involved with payments to vendors and cash payroll of troops. Tom completed his 5 years of military duty as a captain, and after he was discharged, went on to work for the Bechtel Corporation. In 2014, he was able to attend a 50-year reunion with a few of his Vietnam buddies. Tom, thank you for your service.
Dell Krause, United States Navy, 1961 to 1964, quilted by Gretchen Crozier, presented by Di Lovett, Marilyn Mulker, and Jan Pinney. You look comfy there, Dell.
Thumbs up, that's good. Dell Krause was lieutenant in the Navy. He went in 1961 to officer candidate school in Rhode Island. In 1961 to 1963, he was 1st Division Officer, Special Service Office on a large aircraft carrier. In 1963 to 1964, he was Safety Officer in Concord Naval Weapons Center, where the ammunition ships were loaded before being transferred to Vietnam. He became a lieutenant in the U.S. Naval Reserve. Dell grew up in Lodi, California, and he was very active in sports his whole life. He went to the University of San Francisco with a degree in business administration. He was voted in as a board director for the Menlo Park Fire Protection District. He and his wife, Susie, lived in several places in California before moving to Stone Ridge Creek in 2013.
Ooh, kisses. Bruce Mickles, United States Navy, 1958 to 1962, quilted by Gretchen Crozier, presented by Marilyn Mulker, Di Lovett, and Jules Sirocco. With Jules' presence here today, we remember Bob.
He said, I promised him a rocking chair. After graduating from Oregon State, Bruce entered the U.S. Navy as an ensign. After participating in naval ROTC, he was trained in communications, destroyer operations, and air control at the Fleet Operations Center in San Diego. Bruce completed many assignments during his 4 years of service. On the destroyer USS Mansfield, he was a communications officer, a navigator, and an operations officer. On the islands of Eniwetok and Kava, it's so dark up here. Kwajalein, is that right? Kwajalein. Thank you for your help. Never been there. He participated in atomic bomb tests, measuring the distance and the direction of fallout. In the Formosa Straits, he participated in escort duty, carrying Chinese nationalist ships to offshore islands, and those ships were being bombarded by Chinese communists. Bruce also served on plane guard duty on an aircraft carrier, fishing errant pilots out of the water. His ship received a presidential citation for spending more days at sea than any other ship since the Civil War, 182 days to be exact. Bruce confessed, "We got mighty tired of movies and cream corn." We thank Bruce for his service to our country and to our community as a member of Stone Ridge Creek's Resident Council. Thank you, Bruce.
So fallout, that explains a lot, doesn't it? Ludlow Miller, United States Navy, 1958 to 1961, quilted by Gretchen Crozier, presented by Sally Twisselman, Marilyn Mulker, and David Sann. David and Ludlow worked together on the Plant Ops Committee.
You ready? Ludlow. Ludlow always loved sailing. In fact, he taught it as a young man on the East Coast. After graduating from Brown University, he attended Naval Officers Candidate School in Rhode Island. He graduated as an ensign. He was assigned to a destroyer which patrolled the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. He served as an anti-submarine warfare officer and as a gun boss. He felt lucky, I'll say, to have served right between the Korean War and the Vietnam War. After active duty from 1958 to 1961, Ludlow served in the Naval Reserves well into the Vietnam War, but thank the Lord he was never called up. At Stone Ridge Creek, he is a busy guy, as you all know. He's active in plant ops, on the finance committee and the fitness committee, and probably many more things. He also gets up earlier than any of us. Ludlow, you may have served as a lieutenant in the U.S. Navy, but we see you as an admiral here at Stone Ridge Creek.
But Ludlow, leave the lights on for the rest of the presentation, okay? Thank you, David. Rick Moore, United States Navy, 1964 to 1968, quilted by Donna Faye Bauer, Virginia Butterfield, another Moore, Vicki Moore, and Barbara Stewart, presented by Sally Twisselman, Steve Manning, another submariner, Vicki Moore, and Donna Faye Bauer. Rick was a member of NROTC at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. During his senior year, he earned his single-engine pilot's license. He graduated in 1964 as a psychology major and was commissioned as a naval ensign. While planning to become a naval aviator, Rick was called to Washington, D.C. by Admiral Hyman Rickover, who redirected Rick's interests to submarines. He graduated in 1965 from submarine school in New London, Connecticut, and was assigned to the USS Wahoo at Pearl Harbor. Tours on that vessel took him throughout the Far East. One extended tour of 69 days underwater involved spying on Russian naval operations on the Kamchatka Peninsula. In 1967, Lieutenant J.G. Moore was in Vietnam as the riverine operations officer on the YRBM barge moored in the Mekong Delta. The barge was mined by Viet Cong swimmers and exploded in flames. Rick was cited for outstanding display of courage in the face of the conflagration which followed and contributing greatly to the prevention of personnel casualties. Rick Moore, your community thanks you for your service. Tom. Brent is next, in his wheelchair right here. Brent Myers, United States Air Force, 1958 to 1990. Quilted by Gretchen Crozier, presented by Di Lovett, Jan Pinney, and Zeke Griffin.
Your quilt? Brent Myers, U.S. Air Force, Colonel, U.S. Air Force Reserve. Brent grew up in Wichita, Kansas, and graduated from Wichita State University as an industrial engineer in 1958. He was in the Air Force ROTC, so he was commissioned as a second lieutenant. He was sent to the Wright-Patterson Field in Ohio for basic training before he was sent to Korea. After he left the Air Force, he moved to Kansas City, Missouri, where he was with the City Department of Aviation. He became the Assistant Director of Planning and Engineering, the building of the airport there in Kansas City. He was recruited back into the reserves, and he was sent on special projects to various bases. He returned in 1990 after 32 years and won many military awards. He and LaVonna Friend moved to Stone Ridge Creek in 2013. It's my honor to be part of this for our friend Brent.
Hal Nygaard, United States Army, 1953 to 1955. Quilted by Julia Colburn, presented by Gail Frost, Hilda Miller, and Bonnie Schwegel. With Hilda's presence here today, we remember Stan. We have a couple of peewees holding your quilt today, Hal. I hope people can see it.
Hal was drafted in 1953. He was assigned to the Army Corps of Engineers and trained at the Engineer Supply School. He was deployed to Tokyo, Japan. During the war, many Japanese military facilities had been taken over by the U.S. military. When Hal received his assignment in Tokyo, he was responsible for identifying, inventorying, and inspecting military facilities to determine what needed to be refurbished before returning them to the Japanese military. Hal's assignment had him bouncing all over Japan in a Jeep. Hal ended his military commitment in 1955. Thank you, Hal, for your service.
Vic Olcott, United States Air Force, 1955 to 1989. Quilted by Gretchen Crozier, presented by Marilyn Holton, Gail Frost, and Dottie Necker. With Dottie's presence here today, we remember Jack.
Victor had many accomplishments. There was like about 9 pages that I had to read through, and they said, let's make them really short. So, Victor, I'm sorry, but I'm as short as I can be. He received his ROTC commission to be a second lieutenant in the Air Force in 1955. He was quickly assigned to the 460th Second Air Intelligence Service Squadron, responsible for the Air Force linguistics. For the next 2 years, Victor was trained in his specialties as an interrogator, a linguist, and a technical analyst. At this time, there was a need for military personnel to work as engineers, particularly in rocket research. Victor took part and was assigned to the Lewis Flight Propulsion Center. During the next 2 years, Victor was involved in rocket engine and propellant research and testing. In 1959, Victor had to make a choice as to his direction with the Air Force. His decision allowed him to spend 30 years in the Air Force Reserves, especially the Air Force Intelligence Reserves, an organization where he has been involved in many important talks and decisions. Thank you for your service, Victor, and for all that you've done.
John Piggott, United States Army, 1964 to 1966, quilted by Gretchen Crozier, presented by Julie Casamajor, Dottie Necker, and Ann Garsky. With Ann's presence here today, we remember John.
As a young man, John raced cars at the Marlboro Raceway in Maryland and the Virginia Raceway, which is near the border of North Carolina and Virginia. John was drafted into the Army in April 1964 as the Vietnam War was rising in intensity. He was assigned to the 6th Battalion, 71st Artillery, an anti-aircraft guided missile battery protecting the U.S. Air Force Base at Cam Ranh Bay. He served there between August 1965 and April 1966. According to his interview, John was shot at a couple of times, but did not engage in combat. As a civilian, John had a varied career. He was a professional aerobatic pilot for many years. When he retired in 2009, John bought a Sukhoi Su-29, a very high-performance plane. John and Sabra moved to Stone Ridge Creek in 2014. Thank you, John, for your service.
Bob Ricks, United States Army, 1969 to 1971, quilted by Gretchen Crozier, presented by Gail Frost, Jan Pinney, and Pat Conan. With Pat's presence here today, we remember Jim.
Bob reported for induction in November of 1969. After basic training, Bob received orders to signal school in Georgia. After graduation, he was sent to the Pentagon. There was a slight mix-up, and to Bob's advantage, he was assigned to Stuttgart, Germany. In Germany, his assignment was to work in the communications center for the commanding general of the 7th Army. During that time, Bob worked in a 24-hour per day busy message center. He also volunteered for a top secret and atomal, I had to look it up, it means cosmic top secret, must be really important, Oh, all right.
He says he still can't talk about it.
To give him access to top secret encoded messages and the Army's Enigma machine, which I think is a machine that does special coding. Bob received a promotion to sergeant, and he was assigned to supervise an 8-man team. Bob was discharged in November of 1971 after his 2-year adventure in the Army. Thank you for your service, Bob.
I think he told me he propped up a few bars while he was over there.
There's a lot of things I didn't share.
One Russian entered while we were there.
Doug Shaklee, United States Marine Corps, 1957 to 1961, quilted by Gretchen Crozier and presented by Julie Casamajor, Di Lovett, and Susan Del Baccio.
On August 5th, 1957, California native Doug Shaklee joined the Marines to see the world. He became a fire control technician for heavy artillery after boot camp in San Diego, advanced infantry training at Fort Pendleton, and then training on 75mm anti-aircraft guns at Treasure Island. His first duty station was the huge Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center at 25 Palms in the Mojave Desert. As a fire technician, Doug was assigned to a particular gun and was responsible for keeping it and its radar going. Still hoping to see the world, Doug re-enlisted so that he could go to sea school and be posted on a ship. In October 1960, he arrived at the aircraft carrier USS Princeton. After a short time at sea, the Princeton returned to shore for refurbishing and remained in dry dock, where Doug was the only representative of the fire control unit. Just as the Princeton was ready for sea duty, Doug was reassigned to the Marine base in Barstow, California. Doug was discharged on April 5th, 1961. Doug put well over 100,000 miles on his blue 1959 Renault Dauphine during his enlistment, because while he didn't see the world, he saw lots of California. Doug brought the Pacific Auxiliary Fire Alarm Company in San Francisco and remains involved with it. He and Chloe moved to Stone Ridge Creek in 2014. I have to thank everything in this very humorous life story from the interview that Doug gave in the books upstairs in the library, because this humor is entirely Doug's humor. Thank you for your service.
Captain Bob Steuben, United States Navy, 1961 to 1991, quilted by Gretchen Crozier and presented by Marilyn Mulker, Sally Twisselman, and Jerry Powell.
Bob, I feel I should sing this to you, but that's not happening. Bob participated in Naval ROTC when he was a student at UC Berkeley until he graduated in 1961. He was commissioned as an ensign in the Supply Corps for 2 years. He then joined the Navy Reserve, where he became a captain and commanding officer of 3 procurement units in the LA area. During his 30 years of service, he was also a supply officer aboard the USS Piggott in Pearl Harbor. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, Bob and his shipmates witnessed the detonation of the largest hydrogen bomb the United States had ever exploded. Service to the fleet is the motto of the Supply Corps, and Bob felt fortunate to support the war effort in Vietnam until 1963, when he received his release. Bob, we thank you for your service.
Good morning. Today we are honoring a lot of patriots, and I wanted to take just a quick moment to honor a patriot who had a great deal of, should I say, influence on my career in the Navy, and that was Samuel Gravely. Samuel Gravely was the first African-American commanding officer of a combatant ship in the Navy, and he was my commanding officer on the Piggott. And he and I both witnessed that unbelievable detonation of that hydrogen bomb. He then went on to become quite famous. The last time I saw him, he was Director of Naval Communication, Rear Admiral Gravely, in the Pentagon. He passed away in 2004. This book has been written about his career because he was such an influence to many of us in the Navy, including many people such as Colin Powell. This book is the trailblazer that is the story of his life that I just received this last week, and it brings back many fond memories of my time serving with Vice Admiral Gravely.
Thank you, Bob.
Steve Thomas, United States Navy, 1958 to 1960, quilted by Dawn Lunn, presented by Marilyn Holton, Gail Frost, and Dawn Lunn.
Last today, but not least, Steve Thomas. Steve joined the Naval ROTC at Cal, and after he graduated in 1958, and then he served on the USS Fessenden, which was a radar picket ship running in the Pacific, tracking Russian activity and providing search and rescue capability. He was promoted to a lieutenant during his years in the reserve. We thank you for your service.
As you may know, Randy Cotton hoped to be with us today for this celebration, but he left us last week. A few days before, Jan and Gail were able to conduct a private Quilts of Valor ceremony in the Cotton home for Randy and Nancy and their children and grandchildren and some close SRCreek friends. We're going to show you his quilt today. Nancy, you have our love and our support. Jan and Gail. You know what comes next. While the storm clouds gather far across the sea, let us swear allegiance to a land that's free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair as we raise our voices in a solemn prayer. A special thanks to Ron Hare for his help with our beautiful audiovisual program today. We thank my big sis, Bonnie Schwagel, our liaison with the Amador Valley Quilters Quilts of Valor group, and her talented and prolific quilters at Amador Valley Quilters for their unflagging devotion to our program over these past 4.5 years. Thank you so much. We thank our SRCreek quilters. What can we say about you? You've so faithfully contributed to this program to honor our veterans. Thank you so much. We close with a passage from the famous poem, The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere by William Wadsworth Longfellow. It's the last stanza of the poem. It's a reminder of our nation's tenacity and resilience and resolve. So through the night rode Paul Revere, and so through the night went his cry of alarm. To every Middlesex village and farm, a cry of defiance and not of fear. A voice in the darkness, a knock at the door, and a word that shall echo forevermore. For borne on the night wind of the past, through all of our history to the last, in the hour of darkness and peril and need, the people will waken and listen to hear the hurrying hoofbeats of that steed and the midnight message of Paul Revere. Thank you all for coming out today to honor our SRCreek veterans, and happy 4th of July, everyone.